Okay, right. Good evening, David. I've known David for about 20 years, and he's managing director of a company called Glen Abbot, which is based in Perth and Glasgow. David has specialised in pandemic planning since 2007 and was a government advisor to the 2009 flu pandemic. He is an advisor to the General Medical Council, the General Dental Council, and the Royal College of GPs. He is also currently acting as subject matter expert to one of the UK's critical national infrastructure providers. So that's his background. He is going to talk about pandemic planning and other items. I'm sure it will be of interest to us. So I'd just like to hand over to David, please.
Thanks very much, Jim. Evening, everybody, and thanks very much for asking me to talk about. I think maybe a few of your hearts sunk when you saw that your first speaker of the session was somebody talking about pandemics, because you've probably had enough of the things over the last, what have we got now, 7 months, near enough, we're into on it. What I'm going to do is go through just a few of the slides that I do on this and just cover a few points, and then just open it for questions. And I don't mind if it's questions about something directly about pandemics for yourselves or pandemics for a business or whatever. More than happy to answer questions. And on top of that, if there's something that you particularly want details on, I've got a massive library of information about pandemics that I can give you any background right down to the exact level that you need to have in air conditioning to make it safe. So all these sort of things, if you want any of that, just get in touch with me afterwards and I can share whatever I've got. So I'll share my screen. Let's see, there we go. That one should work. Always trying to remember which one you're on. The Zoom does it. Probably the easiest of all, I would say. So the first thing I thought I would do is just give you a little bit of history of pandemics. And there have been pandemics in one form or another going back as far in history as we can find any sources at all. But I thought I would just look at the kind of what you might call the current era, the last 130, 140 years. The one that probably most folk haven't heard of is the Russian flu, as it was called, in the 1889, 1890. And the big one that everybody, I think, probably will know is Spanish flu, 1819, Asian flu, Hong Kong flu, swine flu. And although this isn't flu, obviously, which is one of the reasons that we've had a problem, because for years we based everything we do, and I'm talking about everybody, the government advisors, Imperial College, everybody else, on flu, because that's what we knew about. We had models that worked, all these sort of things were in place. And then what we get is coronavirus, which isn't flu, but has similar behavioral characteristics. So there's a bit of a problem there, and I can talk a wee bit about that. The one I would mention is the Spanish flu. You often hear in the news that COVID-19 is, the equivalent of the Spanish flu. It isn't. It's nowhere near the Spanish flu. As you can see on there, the Spanish flu, and the number is difficult to ascertain for a lot of reasons. Certainly 20 million deaths, potentially as high as 50, probably not quite as high as that. But there were a number of reasons for why the Spanish flu was so terrible. First of all, the world had been through 5 years of war. So, diets were poor. There had been all the troops in the trenches with gas, all injuries, all these sort of things. And then the flu comes along. And for the H1N1 flu virus, it couldn't have been better. It was, if you were a virus and you were looking to kind of have your tick list of all the things you wanted to make it perfect for you, 1918, 19 was every one of them rolled in one big bundle. And one of the reasons it spread so quickly was that there was a large amount of repatriation going on, obviously from Europe back to the States, to India, all around the world. And these troops were being crammed together in troop ships with no separation of any kind. So the virus again had a perfect breeding ground. And that's one of the reasons that it was such a bad outbreak, just because all the conditions were there to make it work perfectly for a flu virus. And it certainly did. And just another thing on that, if you see the names, the Russian flu, Spanish flu, Asian flu, Hong Kong flu, and suddenly we get COVID-19. Why didn't we get Wuhan flu or China flu, or, although as, what is it, Donald Trump calls it, Kung flu? Yes, really, thank you, Donald. It was to avoid that kind of comment. It was starting to be called the Wuhan flu and the China flu in the early days. And the World Health Organization, WHO, stepped in and said it's called COVID-19. And the reason was to avoid the kind of targeting one group of people. And that was why it became COVID-19. So you can see that, the outbreaks have carried on and will carry on. That's just the way that the world is. And it's more effective now for a virus because of the world travel we've got. People travel the world the whole time. I've worked all around the world for the last 20 years, and I would never think of any problem about, I've done work out in Shanghai, I've done work in the States, all these sort of things. I don't think anything about it, and it's easy to carry the virus when you go. So it's becoming harder to stop a virus just because we don't stop quickly enough, and we spread it, so the virus travels with it. And just one other little point that I get asked quite a lot is, why is it called COVID-19? And it's an interesting one to see how many folk actually know why it's called that, because it's the coronavirus disease 2019. So that's why it's called COVID-19. And it's also, there are one or two fake news stories with a much less pleasant variant on that, usually from the C, meaning something to do with China. But that is why it's called COVID-19. And just kind of based on that, what I thought I would do is just, I did a whole webinar on this about, 6-8 weeks ago, about the myths and the fake news that go around COVID-19. And these are just a few of them. The favorite has been for some time, the 5G network is causing it. And you just think, you need to think a wee bit about what you're saying. First of all, it can't, because this is a virus. It doesn't travel across radio waves. But even if that doesn't convince you, first of all, as you can probably tell from the accent, I come from the north of Scotland. Now, we're lucky to have 4G up there. In fact, it's more likely 2 beans tins and a bit of wet string. But we still get the virus. And one of the first countries outside China that had a really bad outbreak was Iran. And Iran has no 5G anywhere in its borders. It's just nonsense. But it's part of the way things are now, that it's quite a good way to latch onto that and say it's a government plot that's implanting this in our brains. And frankly, if you think that that's what it's doing, you probably haven't got enough brain power to think of it. So maybe. One of the early ones as well, or a couple of the ones we saw, this one was on a lot of Facebook pages. You might have seen it. It was in a black box with white writing. And it was somebody in, was it Korea or Vietnam or something like that? A doctor had said that, if you can hold your breath for 10 seconds, you can't have got the virus, because there's some other reason that's utter drivel. Frankly, there's no other way to put it. It's just not true. And tied to that one was drink water every 15 minutes and that'll flush the virus out. Well, would that it was so easy to get rid of a virus, because we wouldn't have colds or flus or anything else if all you had to do was drink water. I mean, drinking water's good for you. You can't argue with that, but it's just pointless. But it got phenomenal spread, and trying to tell people that it was rubbish, it's very difficult to do. And the one about bleach, again, thank you, Donald. That was another good one of yours. Now, you have to say that there is a degree of truth in this one, because if you drink bleach, you won't get COVID-19. The reason being you'd be dead. But, so you have to say that, well, it's not fake news, it is the truth. It is a very effective way of not getting COVID-19 and dying, but, that wasn't the issue of it, obviously. And just one of the other ones I saw that, I don't know if any of you watch The Simpsons, but they have a really good record at predicting things. It's quite amazing the number of things that have been on The Simpsons that sort of come out to be true. And as I say, there in 1993, they predicted the Osaka flu. And you quite often see an image cut out of that particular episode with Bart and the others talking about coronavirus. That one's been doctored. All that somebody's done is just done a bit of photoshopping and put coronavirus on top of what was Osaka flu. But The Simpsons weren't far out, because that was 1993 they did that, and then 2009 we did have a flu pandemic, and we've got coronavirus. So maybe we should just watch The Simpsons and find out what's going to happen to us. But those are some of the myths, and I mean, literally, the list I've got runs into hundreds of different variants and just general nonsense. And I thought what I would do, if any of you are interested in fake news, I'll show you how to create a fake news coronavirus story. There's a few things you need to do. First thing, it has to come from an expert. So this is a statement made by a doctor, a professor, a nurse. They don't usually name them. Sometimes they just randomly pick a name of a doctor that they find on the internet. But it's quite good to have a professional saying that they're doing it. So that gives you a bit of kudos about it. It's also good if you have it from somewhere a long way away. If you say that it's in Forfar, the chances are there'll be folks saying, that's rubbish. I know it's not true. But if you say it's in China or Houston or Hanoi, you can't prove it because it's away out there somewhere. So that, but there are problems out there. So that there could be something in that. So that's the next stage you've got to get. Then you've got to have something that you can do, because you want it to mean something to you. So there's a perfect cure for coronavirus: stewed plums 3 times a day. That might be worse than the bleach actually after a week, but anyway, there you go. That's something you can do. So it affects you directly, although it's come from an expert in Hanoi. It's aimed at you. You can do something about this. So it's got even better. There's a scientific basis to it, because plums contain all these things, and they do actually. But all you need to Google plums and then do a cut and paste. But look at all the things that it's got. I mean, plums. An expert has told me that it's good for me, and look at all the things that are in it. So it must be true. So that's it. I'm convinced that's how I'm going to avoid getting coronavirus. And what happens next? Panic buying the plums. So that's how to create fake news. That's how easy it is. And if you really want it to be a good one, such as the one about holding your breath and that kind of thing, those are the steps to go through, because that just gives it just that bit where you read it and you think, maybe, is it? That could be. And then there's just enough. And that's so, I do quite a lot of talks about fake news and the like. And that's just one of the examples, that kind of 4 steps to create. And now that I've shown you how to do it, please don't go and create any fake news and say, well, we know just the man who told us how to do this. There's enough folk doing it without me helping you. And if anybody ever wants to check a piece of fake news, I haven't got it on a slide, but there's a brilliant website called Scopes, SCOPES.com. And their whole reason to exist is to debunk myths, not just about coronavirus, but about anything. They're an American one, so a lot of them are about sports people in America and so on. But they have a special COVID section. So if you ever want to find out, if you read something on the internet and you think, is it? Doesn't sound right, go on to scopes.com, and there's a fair bet they'll have already read it, analysed it, and debunked it for you. So I would just say keep an eye on that. Now, the other things that I want to mention quite briefly, testing. There's a lot about testing at the moment. The test that we know works is a diagnostic test, the one you see them taking the swabs and all the rest of it. We know that works. We know that tells you if you have got the virus. The big problem we've got are the antibody tests, which are the ones that tell you if you've had it and you've got antibodies, which may mean you're immune. And that's not 100% guaranteed, but we think there is some immunity in there. The problem is that there are virtually no immunity antibody tests that are truly reliable. I don't know if any of you saw, there was an incident from where I'm from, up in Elgin. 2 folk who were working at RAF Lossiemouth. It was on the news that their employer had used an antibody test and they had both proved to be positive. The NHS then tested them and they weren't at all. It's just their employer had done their best. I mean, you know, you can't criticize it. They had bought testing kits. They just don't work. And the reliability is very poor. And there's a whole raft of problems. And that's one of the big problems they've got. If there was an antibody test that worked 100% every time, we could improve the amount of lockdown we have to face quite a lot, because everybody could be tested. And if you assume that an antibody is immunity because you may have had a version of the virus, that would tell us a huge amount. As it stands, the only tests we can absolutely be sure of saying is you've got it or you've not got it, not whether you've had it and therefore may be immune. So that lack of truly effective antibody testing is a really big problem for us. And my favourite subject, and Jim Grant will have suffered me ranting about masks for years. I'm a skeptic about masks. I suspect from what I've read in the last few days, I'm probably in a very small minority and a decreasing minority. Masks are going to be mandatory, is it, from tomorrow in shops in Scotland? They're already mandatory in public transport. The thing that I have against is the use of the word mask or face covering. First of all, it's not mandatory to wear a mask. It's mandatory to wear face covering, which is not a mask. It's anything you put over your face, a scarf, doesn't matter what it is. I'm still not convinced that they make a huge difference. If you've got it, yes, it does. If you work in the care sector, NHS, care, any care function, they're vital. I accept that. But for most people, if you're not showing symptoms, and I know you could be asymptomatic, I accept that. What worries me about masks is they give people a false sense of confidence that everything's okay. I'm wearing a mask, so I've not got any difficulty. And I saw a video that the government have posted telling you how to make a mask. And it misses out 2 vital steps. The very first step before you do anything with a mask is wash your hands. It's not about making a mask, it's about washing your hands. Because if you've got the virus on your hands because you touched something and then you make the mask, you've just brought it up to your nose and mouth. And then you do all the stuff, you make the face covering, that's fine, you take it off, and then you should wash your hands. Because if not, if you breathed any into it from somebody and it's on the mask and you've taken it off, and you put it down and then you do that, you just brought the virus up to your nose. So masks are good to a point, but they only work if you handle them the right way. And one of the things that I found out is we touch our nose and mouth, or our face generally, 23 times an hour. There's actually been a study from Australia on that. It shows how sad I am that I can find that. 23 times an hour. That's why washing your hands is so critical, because you do it without thinking. And when I'm doing courses, I would say to people, I challenge you to sit for 15 minutes and not touch your face. And almost nobody can do it, because you'll get an itch or you'll think of something, you'll do that, like I often do. If you've got a beard, it's deadly. All these sort of things. So masks, I think, will come in, and there's a study out this week that I've read the first sections of, which suggests that the virus can stay airborne for a period of time. If that's true, and it's based on a very small, two very small samples at the moment, one of them a restaurant, if that were true, we should actually be wearing masks indoors if you're in a crowded place, rather than just being socially distant. The virus can hang in the air for a period of time. You should be wearing a mask indoors. So there's a lot about masks. I can talk about them. As I say, Jim's suffered it many a time. I'm an anti, but I think I'm probably going to be in the wrong camp certainly by the end of the month. And just a little bit about what I think is going to happen. And I spend a lot of time doing this. We do a lot of statistical modelling. We took the Imperial College model that the UK government used, and we completely dismembered it, rebuilt our own version. We built models for the NHS in 2009. So we've done lots of predictions, but the things that are certain is there are going to be lots of spikes. We've seen it, Leicester, Dumfries, Merthyr Tydfil. That's going to happen all the time. It's whack-a-mole. You know, they're going to be coming up all over the place. Is that a second wave? No, it's not. I thought that we would get a second wave in September. I was saying this in January, based on the model we were doing. At the moment, I think that might not happen. There might be a lot of spikes, but actually not enough to call it a second wave. But I think there will be one sometime between November. A few folk that I'm talking to now are moving it closer into January, mixed in with the flu outbreak that will come this winter, as it comes every year. So will there be a second wave? Likely. Now, in the Spanish flu outbreak, the second wave was much worse than the first wave. I don't think that will be the case for us. Again, there's a lot of reasons. Comparing this one to the Spanish flu is dangerous because there were a whole lot of factors that made that difficult. Will there be a vaccine? Again, it's likely. It's not a certainty because there isn't one that works on a coronavirus in the same way. So although there's a lot of people trying to make a vaccine, and more than likely it will work, there is still no certainty. So, and again, back in January, when I was first doing the research on this variant, I said that the vaccine would be released in December. I'm probably a bit ambitious. The reason for that is there will be a vaccine, probably August to September, but they won't release it to the public because it's not been tested. And, you know, if this was Ebola with an 80% fatality rate, you would risk a vaccine that hadn't been fully tested because your chances of dying were 8 out of 10. When your chances of dying are 0.1% realistically, unless you're in one of the high risk groups, the balance of which is the greater risk, probably it's a greater risk with an untested vaccine than actually getting the disease. So the chances are people wouldn't rush to have it. So it's more likely to move into 2021. And will there be another pandemic? Yeah, of course there will. They've been happening since history started. There'll be another one. And it's more likely a flu one. There is already a version happening in China with some pigs that have proved it. So, but you know, is that terrible? Well, it's fine for folk like me that make a living out of it, but overall, chances are it won't be that terrible. It will be a bit the same. And I think maybe this time we'll have learned a lot of lessons of how to manage it earlier and do the right things early on. But yes, there will be another one. And just the reason I mentioned pigs are almost, and in fact, I think they are more dangerous than bats, because pigs can host both human and avian viruses in the same body, and therefore can have a mutation that can make what was an avian flu turn into a human transmissible flu. And there's a lot of countries where people live very close with pigs in the same building all the time, same as you do with fowl. That's how you get the transmissions happening. So is it going to happen? Yes. And to leave you on that cheery note, I think that's as much as I want to say. As I say, I could talk for hours on pandemic, but you'd all lose the will to live. So I thought it'd just be a chance. Just anybody who's got any questions, feel free.
Perhaps it's worth going through the chair for this so we're not talking over each other, folks. And maybe ask David to stop sharing so I can see who's got their hands up.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Anyone got any questions for David? Philip?
You're muted.
I listen from time to time to Tim Hartford on More or Less, the Radio 4 program, The Statistician. Does it irritate you, the lack of data or the precision of data that's given to the public in some of the briefings that we get?
Yes, and the thing about the data, and as I say, we dismantled Imperial College's data right down to individual date line time numbers. The view that I think politicians take is, and it's wrong, is that the public can't cope with the data, and I think that's a mistake. And this focus on the R number is a difficult one. For folk think that the R number is yesterday. You know, if they say the R number today is 0.7, they think that that means yesterday's figure. It means 2 weeks ago figure. The R number is at least 2 weeks behind where things are because of the way it has to be calculated. You know, so you're right. I mean, I think Tim Harford's show is absolutely superb. He's done some wonderful coronavirus things that debunk a lot of the myths that saves me having to do it. I've actually quoted him regularly. But yeah, the numbers are, the folk get confused with numbers. And as I say, the R number is the biggie. And, you know, it's not today's number or yesterday's number, it's 2 weeks ago's number.
Thank you.
Okay. Malcolm?
Yeah, David, one of the hats that I wear in Rotary is that of environment and environmental officer. Do you think as global temperatures rise, that will increase the number of pandemics? Will there be a link to rising global temperatures and pandemics?
One bit of me thinks the answer to that is possibly no, because the most effective temperature for a virus is 4 degrees centigrade. That's the temperature that it really likes. So actually, higher temperatures won't affect it in that way. I did some work for one of the big catering companies, and they were really worried about food and people working in freezer and cold rooms, and that's the reason. And we saw that outbreak in Germany, in Gütersloh, which were in meat factories, which just happened to be kept at 4 degrees. So that's an optimum temperature. I'm not sure. The danger that you might get is not the lack of coronavirus, but things like viruses covered by mosquitoes. Because as the temperatures rise, the mosquitoes will move out of equatorial areas into what were not equatorial areas. And they carry a whole range of things that we've not had to deal with in our country.
Thank you.
Yeah. I saw Mike's hand up.
Hi, David. Obviously, you gave us the information on all the other pandemics and the tragic numbers of people that died. Obviously, there's two schools of thought, which I'm not saying I agree with one of them, but some saying that the cure that we've gone into, i.e., locking down everything, was actually worse than the just living with it and going through it. What's your view on that?
I think the original plan, and this is where I think the government weren't as good as they could have been, was the herd immunity approach, which is what Sweden went to, and that being the idea that you just let it run, and there will be fatalities, but overall we'll come out of it much more quickly. And the problem was that I think that was where we started, and then when the government heard from Professor Ferguson the numbers of fatalities, which were going to be up to 500,000, they just backed right off and said, no, we'll lock it down. I think the lockdown will work. The trouble with herd immunity is that we didn't know enough about coronavirus, COVID-19. If it had been flu, I think we'd have known better. And we just can't understand, or we didn't understand, what it was going to do. We've seen Sweden are now having inquiries about how badly it's gone, and they went for the herd immunity. To get herd immunity to work, which is the number of people who have had the disease and therefore hopefully are immune, you need somewhere between 60 and 80% of the population to have been infected. At the moment, we're running at less than 10% of the population. So we're going to have spikes coming out of it. It's a difficult one. I'm not really answering the question, because I think on balance, I probably thought the lockdown was the better of the two options. But the herd immunity let's just get it over with one. I just think people wouldn't have accepted the level of fatalities we'd have had. In that first 3 weeks, we would have seen the 30 or 40,000 we have now, virtually all of them being in that first 3 weeks, and the government would have been in such pressure to react that the lockdown would have come anyway. So I think it's a long answer to, there's good and bad, but I think the lockdown probably was the better of the two.
Thanks, David. Ronnie?
Ronnie, you're muted.
You have to unmute yourself, Ronnie.
Yeah. Okay, unmuted myself. Thank you. David, one of the things that was interesting on the news tonight, there was a chap being interviewed, and I talked to my brother-in-law last week who works in a care home down in England, in the northwest of England. And he was telling me that they had 2 fatalities within that care home, but also there was some of the staff who had contacted it, and when they could come back to work, they were completely debilitated. You know, they could do possibly what was about half a day's work without being tired. And this very young chap, seemed a fit young lad on the news tonight, said exactly that. I mean, you know, he was just saying how difficult it was, just things like bending down, opening drawers and that, caused him to be breathless. Is that something that, you know, majority of people have experienced, to your knowledge?
Not the majority from what I've heard. I mean, there are some surprisingly young, fit, healthy people who have been debilitated for weeks after getting it. Whereas a couple of folk that I know that from companies I'm working with, they had 2 days off work, and that was 6 weeks ago, and they've been tested, they were positive, and they're absolutely fine now. I think it's a strange virus, and that's why we struggle with it, because it seems to not, it's not like everybody will have the same symptoms, everybody will have the same level of illness, the same recovery period. It seems to affect certain people in certain ways, and that could be anything to do with underlying genetics. And there are a percentage of people who may never fully recover from it. But again, from what I've read, the vast majority of people are okay as long as they let themselves recover enough time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
I just wondered, I'm a retired pharmacist, and I just wondered if the fact we are the fattest country in Europe might be linked to our high death rate from COVID-19.
Yeah, it's one of the factors without doubt. That and I suppose I lied to it in a way, the high level of diabetes. Those are two of the kind of key symptoms that if you have that, then you know you're at a much higher level of risk from the virus. So yeah, that you know there are a number of factors that has given us the death level we've got, sadly, but those are two without doubt that have affected us.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. I'm just looking down, there's no other hands going up. Mike's waving again.
David, do you think we'll have learned the lessons from this moving forward should another pandemic come? Well, I mean, accepting when it comes, really. Accepting that maybe another wave in sort of towards the end of the year or early next year, but another pandemic. Do you think we've learned the lessons from this now?
If it came quickly enough, if it was within the lifetime of a parliament, and I don't mean just the UK Parliament, but worldwide, then yes. Beyond that, probably no. We make mistakes every time. We'll make them again. We'll just make different mistakes next time. The World Health Organization desperately need to improve. I know I'm on record of being a strong critic of theirs, and I hate again to be in Donald Trump's camp, and I'm not in many ways, but the WHO need to react better and quicker. Governments, this is where I would never be a politician. It's easy in my job because I can just say, do this, do that. The politicians have to balance that. If we do that, the economy's okay, but huge numbers of people will die, or we save huge numbers of people, but we wreck the economy. The two, you can't have both. You can have one or the other at an extreme or somewhere in the middle. So will it be better if it happens quickly within 5 years? Yeah, probably it will, because a lot of people are in place to deal with it. And the skills are gathered to deal with it. If it's 10 years, a whole new group of politicians, a whole new people worldwide, new people, same mistakes. Sorry, I sound a bit cynical, but I've been around this a lot over the years. I've dealt with Ebola and dengue fever and a few others, and I see the same signs happening.
I'll make this right. Another two. I'll go to Neil.
I'll just ask you a quick question. The United Kingdom is a relatively small country as far as the whole world's concerned. Has having the individual countries making their own rules helped, hindered, confused the situation? Because I know that being at different stages in different parts of the country, to me, doesn't seem to help the situation.
It would have been great if, first of all, if the WHO had come out straight away and said, this is going to be a pandemic, you need to do this, 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 and this. Every country will interpret that in their own way. But we were 3 to 4 weeks too late in starting. And then in the UK, we were then probably 2 to 3 weeks late in starting again. So we missed the window of really clamping down and doing something about this and stopping it. And that is the problem, that, you know, there is no obviously a world government, but the WHO were the people who should have stamped right away and said, this is going to be the one that matters. You've got to do it. And then it would be difficult for governments to say no.
Thank you. And time for perhaps one more question, if anyone has one.
Well, I was going to say, you spoke about in your illustration about the curative effects of plums. I was wondering what the curative effects of toilet rolls were, because it wasn't a run on plums we experienced, it was a run on toilet rolls.
Well, like, yeah, funnily enough, fake news. Because one of the symptoms that you don't get with COVID-19 is diarrhea. There you go. As simple as that.
On that note, folks,
Nothing like ending on a high, is there? I could lower the tone at any meeting.
folks, I'm sure we've thoroughly enjoyed listening to David this evening. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure he could speak for hours on the subject, and we could keep asking questions. I'm going to turn to Jim Grant again to do the vote of thanks.
David, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to, I was about to say, come and speak to us, but you know, that's over the ether. But and I know you have recently had a pretty busy schedule, so we do appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. My overall impression of what you've said, it's not a very happy scenario, really, but you can see from the questions that you got that created a lot of interest among our members, and you did manage to finish on a high with a laugh. So thank you very much indeed for your talk, and could we just express our thanks in the usual way, please?
Thank you all very